The snow outside fell like a heavy silence, covering the Alps in a white and deadly mantle, but in here, the air vibrated with the scent of beeswax, expensive champagne, and forbidden secrets. I adjusted the black velvet mask over my eyes, feeling the fabric brush against my eyelashes. My heart beat a frenetic rhythm against my ribs, completely at odds with the elegant waltz the orchestra was playing at the back of the hall. I shouldn't be here. I was a fraud wrapped in midnight blue silk, a failed pianist who had inherited a castle she didn't deserve and a legacy she didn't know how to carry. I walked along the edges of the great hall, trying to merge with the shadows. Around me, masked figures swirled in a blur of gold and crimson, faceless, just bodies moving in perfect synchrony. It was the solstice ball, the most sacred tradition of the Chateau of Music, where speaking was forbidden and touch was the only permitted language. It was then that I felt him. I didn't see him first, I felt him. It was as if the temperature in the hall had dropped 10 degrees and, simultaneously, a fire had been lit at the base of my spine. An undeniable gravity pulled my gaze to the center of the dance floor. He was there. Tall. Imposing. Dressed in a black tuxedo cut so perfectly it looked like a second skin, outlining the width of his broad shoulders and the severe line of his back. He wore a minimalist white Venetian mask that covered the upper part of his face, leaving exposed only a firm, cruelly drawn mouth, and a jaw covered by stubble that screamed danger. He wasn't dancing. He stood still, motionless as a black marble statue amidst the colorful chaos, and his eyes, those eyes, gray as a winter storm, were locked on me. My breath hitched. I wanted to run. Survival instinct told me that this man was the apex predator of this food chain. But my feet didn't move. He started walking in my direction. The crowd parted for him to pass, like the Red Sea, without him needing to make a gesture. He moved with a predatory grace, fluid and lethal. When he stopped in front of me, his scent invaded my senses, sandalwood, old sheet music, and something metallic, like snow before a storm. He didn't ask to dance. He didn't bow. He simply extended a hand gloved in black leather. A silent order. I should have refused. But my hand rose of its own volition and rested in his. The leather of his glove was warm. He pulled me. A firm, possessive tug that glued my body to his with an impact that stole what little breath I had left. The orchestra swelled in a dramatic crescendo. His free hand went to my waist, long, strong fingers pressing into the silk of my dress, burning the skin beneath. "You don't belong here, little note." His voice was a raspy whisper, a baritone that vibrated directly in my chest, ignoring my ears and going straight to my womb. I shivered. He knew. But the rule was silence. I tried to pull away, but his arm was an iron bar against my back. "Shoo," he hissed, tilting his head so his lips brushed my earlobe. His beard scratched my sensitive skin, sending electric shivers down my arms. "Don't speak. Feel." He began to move us. It wasn't just a waltz. It was a choreographed seduction. He guided me with absolute authority, anticipating my every step even before I took it. My legs brushed against his, our breaths mingling in the small space between our mouths. I looked up, trying to see through his mask. His gray eyes burned with an intensity that made me dizzy. There was anger there, yes. But there was also a ravenous hunger that mirrored mine. "You play piano like someone afraid to break the keys," he murmured, his mouth so close to mine I could smell the cognac on his breath. "But you dance like someone who wants to be destroyed." "Who are you?" I whispered, breaking the rule, unable to stop myself. He stopped abruptly. We were now in a dark alcove, away from curious eyes, hidden by a heavy velvet curtain. He pushed me gently until my back hit the cold stone wall. He removed the glove from his right hand. His bare, hot skin touched my neck, his thumb tracing the line of my pulse where my blood beat uncontrollably. I am the man who will make you hate this place, he said, his voice low and dangerous. Or the man who will make you forget your own name. He pulled a ribbon from his pocket. Crimson velvet. With slow, agonizing movements, he took my left wrist and tied the ribbon there, tightening the knot with his teeth, his lips grazing the thin skin of my arm. It was a gesture so intimate, so obscene in its delicacy, that my knees gave way. He caught me before I fell, his body pressing mine against the stone, his erection grazing my hip through the layers of clothing, a hard and real promise. "This is your leash," he whispered against my mouth, stopping millimeters from a kiss. "Meet me at the last stroke of the year. If you have the courage." He pulled back before I could respond, before I could beg him to close the distance between us. He disappeared into the shadows of the hall, leaving me there, leaning against the wall, panting, with a red ribbon on my wrist and the terrifying certainty that I no longer wanted to run. I wanted to burn. The morning light in the Alps is unforgiving. It enters through the high windows of the master bedroom like a blade of ice, cutting through the illusion of the previous night. I woke up with bated breath, and the first thing I did was look at my left wrist. It hadn't been a dream. The crimson velvet ribbon was there, tied with that firm and possessive knot, standing out violently against my pale skin. I ran my thumb over the soft fabric, and a shiver ran down my spine, bringing back the memory of his breath on my neck, the pressure of his body against mine. "Meet me at the last stroke of the year." I hid the ribbon under the sleeve of my thick cashmere sweater. I needed armor. Today was not a day for balls and shadows, today was a day to face reality. I was the unwanted heiress in a castle full of vultures, and my grandfather, in his infinite posthumous wisdom, had left me at the mercy of the conservatory director. I descended the stone stairs, following the sound. Music. No. Not just music. It was a contained storm. Strings that wept, brass that roared. The sound came from the great hall, the same place where, hours before, I had been seduced against a wall. I pushed open the double doors, and the sound hit me physically. The hall was transformed. Daylight revealed dust dancing in sunbeams and the austere grandeur of the space. The orchestra was complete, 50 musicians dressed in black, focused like soldiers in a trench. And in front of them, on the podium, was him. My heart skipped a beat. Without the mask, he was even more devastating. His profile was severe, nose straight, cheekbones cutting. Dark hair fell over his forehead, rebellious. He wasn't wearing last night's tuxedo, but a white shirt with sleeves rolled up to the elbows, revealing strong forearms marked by veins that popped with every sharp movement of the baton. Julian Vane. He conducted with his whole body. He was a vision of absolute power. His hands. God, those hands. They were large, expressive, dancing in the air with a mixture of violence and tenderness that made my mouth go dry. I remembered those hands. I remembered the leather of the glove, the thumb on my pulse. He cut the air with the baton. Silence fell instantly. Total. Terrifying. Mediocre, his voice echoed in the hall, cold and disdainful. The cellos are dragging as if they're dying of boredom. Again. From measure 34. He turned, sensing my presence like an animal senses an intruder in its territory. Our gazes met. If last night his eyes were fire, today they were glaciers. Steel gray, impenetrable, devoid of any warmth. He looked at me as if I were a stain on his immaculate score. "You're late," he said. He didn't shout, but his voice projected perfectly to the door. I walked down the center aisle, feeling the weight of 50 pairs of eyes on my back. "No one told me there was a schedule," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "And good morning to you too, Mr. Vane." He stepped down from the podium. His approach was different from last night. There was none of the masked man's predatory fluidity, there was the heavy march of a general. He stopped in front of me, crossing his arms over his broad chest. His scent hit me again. Sandalwood. But this time, without the cognac. Just clean soap and that cold, masculine aroma. It was him. It had to be him. My wrist tingled under my sleeve. Here, the music doesn't wait for Sleeping Beauty, he said, his eyes scanning my face with insulting boredom. I suppose this is the part where you say you want to see the accounts, or sell the violins to pay for designer shoes. Anger heated my blood, dissipating the fear. I didn't come to sell anything. I am music, just like you. He let out a short, dry laugh. He took a step forward, invading my personal space, forcing me to tilt my head back to maintain eye contact. He was much taller than he looked from a distance. You are not music, Clara Belmonte, he murmured, his voice dropping to that dangerous register that had haunted my dreams. You are a pianist who quit. I read your file. You teach do-re-mi to spoiled children in London. You have no calluses on your fingers. You have no fire in your eyes. He grabbed my left hand before I could retreat. His touch was an electric shock. He turned my palm up, inspecting it with disdain. His fingers brushed dangerously close to the sleeve where the ribbon was hidden. My pulse raced against his fingertips. He had to feel it. His eyes narrowed, focusing on my lips for a microsecond before returning to my eyes. Was there recognition there? A spark from last night? Soft hands, he said, releasing my hand as if it burned him. Hands of someone who hasn't played in years. I can surprise you, I challenged, my breath coming out shaky. Julian leaned in, his mouth hovering inches from mine, the heat of his body contrasting with the ice of his words. The only place you can surprise me is on your way out, when you leave. He turned and pointed the baton at the magnificent black Steinway on stage. That piano was Magnus. It is the soul of this house. As long as I am the music director, and as long as you don't prove you aren't a fraud, you are forbidden to touch it. That's ridiculous. I own all of this. Julian looked over his shoulder. His smile was cruel, but devastatingly handsome. You own the walls, Sherry. But I own the sound. And until midnight on the 31st, you are nothing. He stepped back onto the podium, ignoring me completely. Cellos, he thundered. With passion this time, or I swear I'll break your bows. I stood there, with the sound of the orchestra exploding around me, feeling the velvet ribbon tightening on my wrist like a dirty secret. He hated me. The man who had pressed me against a wall and promised to make me forget my name now looked at me as if I were trash. But I saw it. I saw the way his eyes darkened when he touched my hand. Julian Vane might be made of ice, but ice burns too. And I was willing to play with fire. The chateau's library smelled of old leather, pipe tobacco, and silent judgments. It was a cavernous room, lined with books from floor to ceiling, where the only sound was the crackle of the fireplace and the incessant beating of snow against the high windows. I sat in a green velvet armchair, feeling small and out of place. My left wrist burned. The crimson ribbon was there, hidden under the sleeve of my white silk blouse, squeezing my skin with every accelerated heartbeat. The door opened, and her perfume arrived before she entered. Jasmine and cold ambition. So, this is the lost granddaughter. A woman glided into the room. She was stunning in an aggressive way. Blonde, hair pulled back in a bun so tight it looked painful, dressed in an immaculate white suit that screamed purity, though her eyes were dark with malice. Clara Vance. The conservatory's principal soprano and, according to the rumors I'd read in the tabloids at the airport, the woman who expected to inherit my grandfather's kingdom. Clara Belmonte, I replied, without standing up. Clara, she said, dispensing with surnames. She looked at my hands resting in my lap. I expected more. Magnus was a giant. You seem fragile. Before I could respond, the door opened again. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The air grew heavier, charged with static electricity. Julian entered. He didn't look at Clara. His eyes, gray and stormy, found mine immediately. He leaned against the bookshelf opposite me, crossing his ankles with studied negligence. He brought with him the scent of the cold outside and that unmistakable aroma of sandalwood that made my body react in treacherous ways. "Can we end this farce?" he asked, his voice drawling and hoarse. "I have an orchestra to tune in patience that runs out by the minute." The lawyer, Herzwig, a Swiss man with small glasses and surgical precision, cleared his throat behind the massive mahogany desk. "Please, sit down. Magnus Blackwood's will is complex." Julian didn't sit. He remained standing, a dark sentinel watching over the room. I felt his gaze travel down my neck, descending along the line of my shoulders. It was a phantom touch, as real as his hands last night. "To my music director, Julian Vane," the lawyer began, "I leave my collection of 19th century sheet music and lifetime tenure of the podium, provided the conservatory remains faithful to my vision." Julian showed no reaction. Not a muscle moved in his handsome, stern face. "To Miss Clara Vance, I leave my gratitude and freedom from her contract, should she wish to leave." Clara went livid. The veneer of perfection cracked. "Gratitude?" she hissed. "I dedicated 10 years to this old man." "And to my granddaughter, Clara Belmonte," the lawyer raised his voice, cutting her off, "I leave the entirety of the chateau, the Blackwood fortune, and the presidency of the conservatory." I let out a breath. Clara choked. "But Julian..." Julian smiled. A slow, cruel smile that didn't reach his eyes. "With one condition," Zweig continued. "The midnight clause." The silence in the room became deafening. "Clara must prove she is worthy of Blackwood blood. To inherit, she must play the final, unpublished piece I composed on my deathbed, the last winter symphony. The performance must occur at the New Year's Gala, at the exact turn of the year. The broadcast will be global." My blood ran cold. Play? I hadn't played in public for 2 years. My fingers trembled just thinking about it. If she fails, if the performance is interrupted or deemed unworthy by the board, the inheritance reverts to the administrative board, currently chaired by Miss Clara Vance. Clara leaned back, a triumphant smile blooming on her red lips. "She can't do it," Clara said, laughing softly. "Julian, have you heard her play? She's a kindergarten teacher. It will be a massacre." I looked at Julian. He uncrossed his arms and walked slowly toward me. The lawyer and Clara disappeared from my focus. There was only him. He stopped beside my armchair, so close his leg brushed the fabric of my skirt. He leaned in, resting a hand on the arm of the chair, cornering me. "She's right, little note," he whispered, so only I could hear. "You will break on that stage. The world will watch you fail." I raised my chin, our noses almost touching. I could see the gold flecks in his gray irises. "Then help me," I challenged. "If I fail, you get Clara as your boss. Do you really want that?" His jaw tightened. I touched a nerve. He hated Clara. "I don't help lost causes," he said, but he didn't pull away. His gaze dropped to my lips, lingering there with a hunger that contradicted his disdain. "But perhaps I might enjoy watching the spectacle of your ruin." The lawyer held out a black leather folder. "Here is the original score, Miss Clara. The only copy. Good luck. 5 days remain." I took the folder with trembling hands. Julian moved away abruptly, as if my proximity offended him or tempted him. Clara stood up, smoothing her suit. "Pack your bags, darling. London is charming in January." When they left, I was alone with the folder. I opened it reverently. The paper was heavy, the notes written in my grandfather's frantic and brilliant handwriting. The music, my God, the music was beautiful. Complex, dark, full of pain and hope. I began to read the staff, hearing the melody in my head. The first movement was stormy. The second, melancholic. I turned the page to the third movement, and my heart stopped. The next page was blank. I flipped through the rest. Nothing. Empty paper. The symphony ended abruptly in the middle of a measure. There was no ending. Trouble in paradise? The voice came from the doorway. Julian hadn't left. He was leaning against the frame, watching me with that disturbing intensity. "It's incomplete," I whispered, panic rising in my throat. "The last pages are missing. There is no ending." Julian entered the room, closing the door behind him with a soft click that sounded like a prison lock. He walked toward me, rounding the desk. "Magnus never finished it," he said, his voice devoid of surprise. "Or perhaps, he wanted you to finish it. I am not a composer. You are a Blackwood." He stopped in front of me and, in a shocking move, grabbed my left wrist. He squeezed it over the silk of my sleeve. Exactly over the ribbon. My entire body tensed. Did he know? Could he feel the extra volume of the velvet under the fabric? His thumb caressed the spot where my pulse beat uncontrollably. The heat of his hand penetrated the silk, burning the ribbon into my skin. "Your pulse is beating like a frightened bird, Clara," he murmured, dark eyes fixed on mine. "Are you afraid of the music? Or are you afraid of me?" "I'm afraid of failing," I admitted, my voice weak. He pulled me a step closer. The space between us vibrated. "Then discover the end of this symphony. Because if you step onto that podium and there is silence." He released my wrist and his hand moved up, grazing my neck, stopping at the nape, fingers tangling in my hair. "I promise I will be the first to applaud your fall." He leaned in and, for a hallucinatory second, I thought he was going to kiss me. I closed my eyes, desire overcoming common sense. I felt his breath on my mouth. But he only whispered, "Start playing, Clara. Time is running out." When I opened my eyes, he was already leaving me alone with an endless symphony and a body burning for a man who desired my destruction. It was 3 a.m. and the chateau breathed like a sleeping beast. I couldn't sleep. The image of the blank staves danced behind my eyelids, and the ghost of the velvet ribbon on my wrist seemed to squeeze tighter with every passing hour. The silence in my room was suffocating. I needed to play. Not to prove anything to anyone, but to remember who I was before the bills and grief had silenced me. I went down the stairs on tiptoe, barefoot, dressed only in an ivory silk nightgown I found in the antique wardrobe and a thick wool robe that barely protected against the cold seeping through the stones. The great hall was plunged in gloom, lit only by the bluish moonlight streaming through the high windows, reflecting off the snow outside. The black Steinway waited in the center, a magnificent and forbidden beast. "You are forbidden to touch it," Julian had said. I touched the cold lid of the piano. "Let's see if you bite," I whispered. I sat on the leather bench. The cold of the ivory under my fingers was a shock of reality. I closed my eyes and began. Not the unfinished symphony. Not the music of my grandfather's death. I played a Chopin nocturne. Something melancholic, fluid, nocturnal. The first notes came out shy, rusty. But as the melody progressed, my body remembered. Muscle memory took control. The sound filled the empty hall, climbing the stone walls, a lonely prayer in the darkness. I forgot the cold. I forgot the fear. There was only the music. You're playing too fast. Chopin demands longing, not haste. The sound of his voice made me jump. My hands froze on the keys, creating a horrible dissonance. Julian emerged from the shadows of a column, as if conjured by the music. He wasn't dressed as a conductor. He wore dark flannel pajama pants and a gray t-shirt, so worn and thin it molded to every contour of his chest. He held a crystal glass with an amber liquid. His hair was disheveled, falling over his forehead, giving him a dangerously accessible and devastatingly sexy look. "Are you always watching?" I asked, heart racing. I pulled the robe to close the neckline better, feeling exposed. He ignored my question and walked to the piano. He set the glass on the lid with a dull thud. "I said you were forbidden to touch this piano." "And I decided I don't take orders in my own house," I retorted, lifting my chin. Julian stopped beside me. He smelled of whiskey, sleep, and that intoxicating sandalwood. His gray eyes shone in the dark, fixed on my neck, where my pulse betrayed me visibly. "Disobedient," he murmured. It didn't sound like a criticism. It sounded like a dirty compliment. He went around the bench and, instead of kicking me out, stood behind me. I felt the heat of his body at my back, a solid wall of human temperature that made me forget the cold of the hall. "Your posture is wrong," he said, voice raspy near my ear. "You're tense." Shoulders. His large, warm hands landed on my shoulders, thumbs pressing into the base of my neck, are hard as rock. I moaned softly, involuntarily, when he massaged a knot of tension. He paused for a second, absorbing the sound, and I felt his breathing change, become heavier. "Relax, Clara," he whispered. His hands moved down my arms, slow, burning through the wool of the robe, until they reached my wrists. He held my wrists and lifted my hands, placing them back on the keys. His left hand rested over my left, covering the ribbon hidden under the robe's sleeve. He knew. He had to know. His thumb caressed the inside of my wrist, exactly over the velvet. "The piano is like a lover," he said, mouth so close to my ear his lips brushed my hair. "If you try to dominate it with force, it closes up. You have to seduce it. You have to convince it to give you the sound." He leaned over me, his chest pressed against my back, enveloping me completely. He reached out his right hand and played a high, clear note that hung in the air. "Play," he ordered. "But this time, feel the weight of the keys. Don't use your fingers. Use the weight of your body. Let yourself fall into the music." I started playing again. This time, he didn't move away. He stayed there, glued to me, an overwhelming presence. Occasionally, his hand corrected mine, his fingers intertwining with mine to adjust the curvature, his skin brushing mine. It was delicious torture. Every time our bodies touched, the music became more intense, more charged with eroticism. I wasn't playing Chopin. I was playing Julian. When the music ended, the silence that followed was heavy, laden with unspoken things. His hands were still over mine, resting on the keys. I turned my head, and he was there, inches away. His eyes were dark, dilated, focused on my mouth. I could see his eyelashes, the texture of his stubble, the small scar on his lower lip. "You have talent," he admitted, voice scratched, as if the words hurt his throat. "Hidden under fear and years of neglect, but it's there. Is it enough to finish the symphony?" I whispered. Julian let out a shaky breath and pulled away slightly, creating a cold space between us that I immediately regretted. He picked up the glass of whiskey and took a long sip, as if he needed to put out an internal fire. The problem with the symphony isn't technique, Clara. It's emotion. He looked at me, leaning against the curve of the piano. Magnus didn't finish it because he died. He stopped writing because he reached a point he couldn't resolve. What point? Julian smiled, a sad and cynical smile. The climax. The resolution of passion. He knew how to write about pain, about winter, about death. But about consummated love? About total surrender? Julian shook his head. That he never knew. And you. He reached out and, with one finger, traced the line of my jaw, descending to the collarbone exposed by the nightgown. The touch was light as a feather, but devastating as an earthquake. You look at me like you want me to devour you, but you recoil when I get close. How can you write an explosive ending if you're afraid to burn? I'm not afraid to burn, I said, voice steadier than I felt. I'm afraid of getting burned by the right person. His finger stopped at my left wrist, pressing the ribbon through the sleeve. Maybe, he whispered, eyes burning into mine. Or maybe you're afraid to discover that you like the fire. He moved away, turning his back to me. Listen to the symphony tomorrow, Clara. But don't listen with your head. Listen where it asks for blood. And until then. He stopped at the door, without looking back, keep playing Chopin. It suits you. He disappeared into the darkness of the corridor, leaving me alone in the freezing hall, with the taste of whiskey and desire in the air, and the absolute certainty that, to finish that music, I would have to let myself be destroyed by him. The blank paper stared at me with silent contempt. I had been sitting in my grandfather's dusty office for 3 hours, surrounded by balls of crumpled paper. The last winter symphony ended in a furious crescendo of violins and timpani and then, nothing. The abyss. How do you end a storm? How do you translate into notes the surrender Julian spoke of last night? You're afraid to discover that you like the fire. His voice echoed in my head, distracting me. My left wrist tingled. I was still wearing the ribbon. I had washed it in the bath, dried it carefully, and tied it back on. It was my dirty secret, my velvet amulet against the hostility of this house. A dry knock on the door interrupted my creative torture. The maestro demands your presence in the great hall. Now. It was one of the assistants, a pale boy who looked at me as if I were an intruder about to be expelled. I grabbed the incomplete sheet music and went down. The great hall was in full swing. But something was different. The atmosphere was heavy, electric. Clara was sitting in the first row of the empty audience, legs crossed elegantly, writing in a notepad with a satisfied smile on her lips. On the podium, Julian was facing away, his white shirt already slightly sticking to his shoulder blades from the effort of conducting. Stop, he ordered, cutting off the orchestra with a violent gesture. Silence fell. He turned slowly to me. In the harsh midday light, the seductive shadows of dawn had vanished, replaced by professional hardness. Clara, he said, without miss or any courtesy. You decided to honor us with your presence. We are waiting for the piano solo of the second movement. I walked down the aisle. The musicians whispered amongst themselves. I felt like Joan of Arc walking to the stake. I haven't finished the ending yet, I said, keeping my voice steady. I didn't ask for the ending, Julian retorted, stepping down from the podium. He walked to the piano, running his hand over the black varnish. I asked for the second movement. The one your grandfather wrote when your grandmother died. It is pure pain. Do you think you can play pain, or was your life in London too comfortable? The taunt was cheap, but it worked. Anger lit up in my chest. Get out of the way, I said, brushing past him. His scent enveloped me for a brief second, that damn sandalwood, and I saw his eyes drop to my wrist, hidden by the sleeve of my wool coat. A glint of recognition passed through his gaze, warm and private, before the mask of ice fell back into place. I approached the Steinway. The piano bench, an antique piece of solid wood upholstered in leather, was waiting for me. I sat down. I adjusted the score. I took a deep breath, trying to ignore Alara's eyes bored into my back and Julian's imposing presence less than a meter from me. I lifted my hands. I played the first chord. A B minor, deep and resonant. And then, the world tilted. There was a dry crack, loud like a gunshot. The wood beneath me gave way. I felt gravity pull me violently backward and down. The bench collapsed completely. My instinct was to try to grab the keyboard, which would have crushed my fingers under the heavy lid if it fell. Clara. It wasn't a shout, it was a roar. Before my back hit the marble floor, strong arms wrapped around me. The impact was brutal, but not against the stone. I hit a solid, warm, hard body. Julian had moved within human speed. He caught me mid-fall, his arm around my waist, the other hand protecting my head. We fell together, him underneath, absorbing the shock. We lay tangled on the floor, surrounded by the wooden debris of the bench. The hall went absolutely silent. Not even the orchestra breathed. I opened my eyes, stunned. Julian's face was inches from mine. His breathing was irregular, hitting my face. His pupil was dilated, swallowing the gray of the iris. The panic in his eyes was real. Raw. Your hands, he gasped, voice hoarse. Clara, your hands. I lifted my trembling hands. Intact. Julian grabbed them, inspecting every finger with feverish urgency, turning the palms, touching the joints. His touch wasn't that of an arrogant maestro, it was that of a desperate man. I'm fine, I whispered, voice cracking. You caught me. He let out a shaky sigh and rested his forehead against mine for a second. If you had hit your hands on the marble. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. My career, the inheritance, the music, it would all have ended. He raised his head and his look changed. Panic vanished, replaced by a cold, murderous fury. He looked at the pieces of wood scattered around us. Still half lying on him, I followed his gaze. One of the bench legs hadn't broken from old age. The wood at the joint was lighter. There were sawn marks. Precise cuts, made to give way under weight. Julian realized it the same second I did. He pushed me gently to the side and stood up in a fluid motion, pulling me with him. He didn't let go of my hand. On the contrary, he squeezed it tight, pulling me behind his back, placing himself between me and the rest of the room. Get out, he said. The voice was low but carried a violence that made two violinists step back. But maestro, the rehearsal. Get out, he thundered, voice echoing in the ceiling beams. The rehearsal is over. Everyone out. Now. The orchestra dispersed like a flock of frightened birds. Only one person remained. Clara. She stood up slowly, smoothing her skirt, with an expression of faked concern. My God, what a horrible accident. That old furniture. I always told Magnus to change it. Julian turned to her. He was still holding my hand, his thumb pressing the velvet ribbon through my sleeve, an anchor point in the middle of the storm. This wasn't old age, Clara, Julian said, voice cutting like glass. And you know it. Are you accusing me of something, darling? She smiled, innocent. Careful. The board doesn't like defamation. Julian took a step forward, dragging me with him, keeping me protected. Tell the board, he said, every word pronounced with lethal precision, that if anyone touches a single hair on her head again, or a single key of her piano, I won't just resign. I will burn this conservatory to the ground with all the secrets I know inside it. Clara's smile faltered. For the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. She turned her back and left, heels clicking furiously on the marble. When the door closed, we were alone in the silence of the great hall. The adrenaline began to fade, leaving me shaking. Julian turned to me. The anger in his face softened, but the intensity remained. "You're shaking," he murmured. "Someone sawed the bench," I said, reality hitting me. "They want to cripple me." Julian held my face with both hands. His palms were hot, rough, alive. He forced me to look at him. "They are afraid, Clara. Because they heard you play last night. Because they know you can win." I could have lost my hands. "I wasn't going to let that happen," he interrupted, fiercely. "I will never let that happen." He looked at my mouth, and for a moment, I thought he was going to finish what he started at the ball. My heart beat against his chest. But he pulled back, releasing my face, though his eyes continued to hold me. "From now on, you don't touch anything I haven't checked first. You don't eat anything that doesn't come from my kitchen. And you don't stay alone in this hall." "That sounds like prison," I whispered. "It sounds like protection," he corrected. He lowered his gaze to my left wrist. With a slow movement, he pulled my coat sleeve up, revealing the crimson velvet ribbon. He ran his thumb over the knot he himself had tied. "The ribbon stays," he said, voice husky. "To remind you that your life is in my hands now. And I don't lose what is mine." He let go of my wrist and walked away, heading toward the debris of the bench like a general assessing the battlefield, leaving me there, with the mark of his touch burning on my skin and the terrifying certainty that the game had just become deadly. The chateau transformed into a fortress. In the 24 hours following the accident, the atmosphere shifted from passive hostility to active paranoia. There were new security guards in the corridors, large, silent men Julian had hired out of his own pocket. My food was brought directly by the chef, who trembled visibly under Julian's watchful eye. I hadn't seen Clara. It was said she was locked in the East Wing, preparing a legal defense in case Julian made good on his threat to expose her. I walked to the Great Hall for the afternoon rehearsal. My legs still trembled slightly, a ghost of the fall, but my determination had hardened like steel tempered in fire. They wanted me to be afraid. They wanted me to flee to London. I was staying. When I entered, silence fell. The orchestra was there, but no one was tuning instruments. Everyone was looking at the center of the stage. The black Steinway was there, majestic and imposing. But the bench was new. A modern, robust piece, not elegant at all, but unbreakable. And Julian was on his knees in front of it. I stopped, heart skipping a beat. Seeing a man like Julian Vane on his knees was a powerful image. He was checking the bolts of the bench, testing the stability with his bare hands, shaking the structure with brute force to ensure it wouldn't give. He stood up when he sensed my presence. He brushed dust off his black trousers and looked at me. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes swept me from head to toe, checking for damage, before nodding once. "It's safe," he said. His voice echoed in the silence. It wasn't a statement for me, it was a warning to the entire room. "You can sit." I walked to the stage. I felt the musicians' gazes on my skin. Curiosity, skepticism, pity. I hated pity. I sat on the bench. It was hard, uncomfortable, and the safest thing I had ever felt. "What are we playing?" I asked, resting my hands in my lap. Julian stepped up to the podium. He didn't pick up the baton immediately. He looked at the 50 musicians in front of him with cold contempt. "You saw what happened yesterday," he said, voice low and dangerous. Someone in this room, or connected to someone in this room, tried to silence this piano. He paused, letting the weight of the accusation settle. Today, we are not rehearsing technique. Today, we are going to prove why they are afraid of her. He turned to me. Second movement. Winter's Lament. It was the hardest piece. Slow, painful, full of pauses where silence weighed as much as the notes. Clara, he said, and the use of my name sounded intimate amidst the formality. Don't play for them. Play for the broken bench. Play the anger. Play the fear. He raised the baton. I closed my eyes. Took a deep breath, smelling the sandalwood that seemed permanently impregnated in my senses now. Play the anger. My hands descended onto the keys. The first chord was a suppressed scream. A C minor that resonated in the chest. The orchestra entered right after, a wave of low strings supporting my melody. At first, I was tense. But then I looked at Julian. He wasn't conducting the orchestra, he was conducting me. His eyes were locked on mine, guiding every nuance, every breath. When he wanted more power, he closed his fist in the air, and I hit the keys with violence. When he wanted softness, his hand opened, fingers caressing the air, and I let the sound die in a whisper. It was a conversation. An erotic dance without physical contact. He pulled, I pushed. He demanded, I delivered. Sweat began to run down my back. My hair came loose from the clip. I forgot the orchestra. I forgot Clara. I forgot the will. I was bleeding into the piano, pouring out years of frustration, of unpaid bills, of loneliness in London, of grief for a mother who died hating music. And Julian took it all. He absorbed my pain and returned it in the form of art. When the last note died, I left my hands suspended over the keys, chest heaving, body vibrating as if I had run a marathon. The silence in the hall lasted a full 5 seconds. Then, I heard a sound. The first violin was tapping his bow on the music stand. Then the cello. Then the flutes. In seconds, the entire orchestra was applauding in the traditional musician's way, stomping feet and tapping bows. It wasn't polite applause. It was respect. I looked up, stunned. Julian had lowered his arms. He was sweating, hair stuck to his forehead, chest rising and falling. He looked at me not as the tyrant maestro, and not as the furious protector. He looked at me like a man who had just seen a miracle. Or a catastrophe he desperately wanted to possess. You are not a fraud, he said, voice hoarse, audible only to me amidst the noise. You are a danger, Clara Belmonte. He stepped down from the podium and walked to me. The applause ceased when he raised his hand. Rehearsal is over, he announced, without taking his eyes off me. Miss Clara has proven her point. He extended his hand to help me up. I accepted. His skin was burning. We need to get out of here, he murmured, pulling me close under the pretext of helping me off the bench. Run away? I asked, still dizzy from the performance. No. Get a weapon. I frowned. Magnus wrote the end of the symphony for a specific piano, he explained, guiding me to the side exit, away from the orchestra's eyes. An old playel from 1920. The sound is different. More human. The Steinway is too perfect for the ending he wanted. Where is this piano? In a hunting cabin on the mountain. In the old village. Julian stopped at the door and looked at me. There was an urgency in him, a need to get me out of there. We're going to get it now. Just the two of us. And the snow? I pointed to the window, where a white storm was beginning to obscure the peaks. Julian smiled. That dangerous smile that made my wrist and the velvet ribbon burn. Are you afraid of a storm, Clara? You just created one in there. He opened the door. The freezing wind entered, but I didn't feel cold. Go get a coat, he ordered. And don't be long. I want to be far from this nest of snakes before nightfall. I obeyed. As I ran up the stairs, I felt the blood pulsing in my veins. We were going to the mountain. Alone. Far from Clara. Far from the rules. And from the way Julian had looked at me while I played. I knew the piano wasn't the only thing he wanted to play in that cabin. Julian's vintage Land Rover tore through the snow like a tank, climbing the narrow, winding road that led to the mountain peak. Outside, the world had vanished. Sky and earth were a single white blur. The storm Julian had predicted wasn't just bad weather, it was a solid wall of ice and wind. Inside the car, the silence was dense, broken only by the hum of the heater and the hypnotic rhythm of the windshield wipers. I looked at Julian's profile. He drove with one hand relaxed on top of the steering wheel and the other on the gear stick, shifting with fluid precision. He seemed in his element. The chaos outside didn't disturb him, it seemed to calm him. We're getting cut off, I observed, watching the road behind us disappear under a fresh blanket of snow. Is fear making you talk, Clara? He asked, without taking his eyes off the road. It's not fear. It's prudence. If we get stuck. If we get stuck, he interrupted, shooting me a quick, intense glance, we'll have to survive on body heat and old wine. There are worse fates. My face heated up. He knew exactly which buttons to push. The car stopped abruptly next to a dark wooden structure, almost buried in snow. The cabin looked small, rustic, a black ink blot on a white canvas. We're here, he announced, turning off the engine. The wind howled as soon as we opened the doors. Snow hit our faces like needles. Julian moved fast, grabbing my arm to keep me upright against the gust, and guided me to the cabin door. He took a heavy iron key from his pocket, struggled with the frozen lock for a second, and pushed the door open. We entered, and he shut the world out with a dull thud. The interior was freezing, but the air was still. It smelled of pine, resin, and memories. It was a single space, with exposed wooden beams and a gigantic stone fireplace that took up an entire wall. And in the corner, covered by a dusty linen sheet, was the reason for our trip. Julian wasted no time. Don't take off your coat yet. It'll take a while to heat this up. He knelt by the fireplace, stacking dry wood with efficient movements. In minutes, flames began to lick the wood, casting dancing shadows on the walls. I walked to the shape in the corner. I pulled the sheet. Dust danced in the weak light entering through the windows. The Pleyel piano was smaller than the Steinway, made of warm walnut wood, with scars of use. It wasn't a stage instrument, it was a composer's instrument. There were cigarette burns on the edge, ink stains, my grandfather's history carved into the wood. I touched a key. The sound was soft, velvety, with a slightly imperfect timbre that gave it a human soul. It's beautiful, I whispered. It's honest, Julian corrected, appearing behind me. He had taken off his heavy coat, leaving him in a thick dark gray turtleneck sweater that accentuated the width of his chest and the color of his eyes. The Steinway lies. It makes any mediocre pianist sound good. The Pleyel exposes the truth. He moved away to a dusty shelf and returned with an unlabeled bottle of red wine and 2 thick glass tumblers. Your grandfather kept the best vintages here. For when he wanted to escape the chateau, and the people who idolized him. He poured the wine. The liquid was dark as blood. Let's drink, he said, handing me a glass. Because we're not going anywhere tonight. I looked at the window. Snow had completely covered the Land Rover. We were buried. Did you plan this? I asked, accepting the glass. Julian leaned against the piano, watching me over the rim of his glass. The fire in the fireplace was beginning to warm the room, but the heat in his eyes was more intense. I planned to come get the piano. The storm, he shrugged, was just a happy coincidence. Or maybe fate wanted to see you without your offended heiress armor. I am not an offended heiress. I am a woman trying to survive in a nest of vipers. And yet, Julian took a step forward. This afternoon, on the podium, you didn't look like you were surviving. You looked like you were reigning. He touched his glass to mine. A silent toast. I took a sip. The wine was strong, earthy, exploding in warmth in my stomach. Why did you hate me so much, Julian? Before I even arrived. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. Arrogance disappeared for a moment, revealing weariness. He sat on the floor, in front of the fireplace, and motioned for me to join him. I hesitated, then sat on the sheepskin rug, keeping a safe distance. Magnus spoke of you, he said, looking at the flames. The revelation shocked me. He hated my mother. He never contacted me. He was a proud and stupid man. But he followed you. He had newspaper clippings of your first victory in the Vienna competition. He had bootleg recordings of your recitals in Paris before. He looked at me, before you quit. Tears pricked my eyes. I didn't quit because I wanted to. My mother got sick. The money ran out. Music doesn't pay hospital bills. I know that now, Julian said, voice soft. But at the time? At the time, all I saw was a generational talent being wasted. I looked at him, dying in that bed, wishing you were there, and I hated you for not being there. He turned to me. The distance between us on the rug seemed to shrink. I thought you were a spoiled girl who treated music as a hobby. That you came here to sell his legacy and buy shoes. And now, my voice was a thread. Julian set his glass on the floor. He leaned toward me, resting on one elbow. The firelight reflected on his skin, gilding the sharp edges of his face. Now. He reached out and, with a boldness that stole my breath, pulled the clip holding my hair. Brown locks fell over my shoulders. Julian twirled a strand around his finger, studying the texture as if it were rare silk. Now I see someone who plays with the fury of someone who lost everything. I see someone who is as afraid as I am of letting this legacy die. My heart beat so hard it hurt. You are afraid? The great Julian Vane? I'm afraid of silence, he confessed in a whisper. I'm afraid of waking up one day and the music is gone. His vulnerability was the most dangerous weapon he had used so far. It disarmed me completely. Without thinking, I brought my hand to his face. The stubble was rough against my soft palm. He closed his eyes at my touch, tilting his head into my hand, like a wild animal accepting a caress. We will finish the symphony, I promised. He opened his eyes. The gray had darkened, turning into smoke. Yes. We will. His hand moved up from my hair to my nape, pulling me millimeters closer. But tonight, we are trapped. There is no symphony. There is no Clara. There is no world. What is there, then? I asked, mesmerized by his mouth. Julian slid his gaze to my lips, then to my left wrist, where the sweater sleeve hit the ribbon. There is the fire, he whispered. And there is the question of knowing how long we can stay close to it without burning. He didn't kiss me. Instead, he leaned back, pulling a thick blanket from a chest and throwing it over both of us. Sleep, Clara. Tomorrow we have a piano to transport. And I need you strong. I lay down beside him, under the blanket, the heat of his body radiating to mine. He didn't touch me, but the tension between us was a third presence in the room. Outside, the storm roared. But in here, the real danger wasn't the cold. It was the man sleeping next to me, and the terrifying fact that I no longer wanted the storm to pass. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world of blinding white and crystalline silence. I woke up wrapped in the fur blanket, alone on the rug in front of the fireplace. Embers still glowed, but the warmth that woke me didn't come from the fire. It came from the rich smell of fresh coffee invading the cabin. I stretched, feeling muscles sore from yesterday's tension. I sat up, pulling the blanket to cover my shoulders, and looked for Julian. He was in the small kitchen, back to me, leaning against the rustic wooden counter. He had put on yesterday's black trousers, but still wore the gray knit sweater. His hair was damp, as if he had just washed his face with freezing snow water. He held an enamel mug, looking out the window at the white vastness, lost in thought. "Good morning," my voice came out raspy, heavy with sleep. Julian turned slowly. Morning light hit his face from the side, illuminating the gray of his eyes. There was something different in his posture today. Less tension in the shoulders, but a new vigilance in his gaze. "The snowstorm stopped," he said. "The road should be clear within an hour." I made coffee. It's instant and terrible, but it's hot and has caffeine. I stood up, holding the blanket around my body like a Roman toga, and walked to him. The wooden floor was icy under my bare feet. "I'll take anything hot." He poured a second cup and held it out to me. It was a simple movement. Banal. I reached out my right arm to take the cup, but changed my mind halfway to hold the blanket with that hand, extending my left instead. The sleeve of my loose silk nightgown slipped down my forearm with gravity. Time stopped. The crimson velvet ribbon, tied firmly on my pale wrist, was exposed in the raw morning light. The red was violent against the white of my skin and the gray of the kitchen. The complex knot the ghost had made, that he had made, was there, intact, undeniable proof that I had not only accepted the leash, but kept it. Julian froze. His eyes dropped from my face to my wrist. I saw his pupils dilate suddenly, swallowing the iris. His hand, holding my coffee cup, gripped so hard his knuckles turned white. He recognized it. Of course he recognized it. He had been the one to tie that knot with his teeth. My heart stopped. I should have pulled the sleeve. I should have hidden it. But I was paralyzed by the shock of his gaze. He said nothing. He didn't shout, "It's you." Instead, a heavy, dangerous silence filled the kitchen. Slowly, Julian set the cup on the counter, ignoring the coffee. He took a step forward, cornering me against the cold wood of the cabinets. He reached out. His fingers, rough and hot, grazed the sensitive skin on the inside of my arm, just below the ribbon. "An interesting choice of accessory," he murmured. His voice was velvet over gravel, deceptively calm, but with a predatory vibration underneath. I trembled. It's personal." "Personal," he repeated, savoring the word. His fingers moved up, tracing the line of red velvet, circling my wrist. "It looks like a promise. Or a surrender." He knew. God, he had to know. But his expression was unreadable, a mask of calculated seduction. "Who gave it to you, Clara?" he asked, leaning in until our faces were level. "Some lover in London?" "No one," I whispered, unable to look away from his mouth. It was in a dream." A slow, almost imperceptible smile curved his lips. The kind of smile a wolf gives before biting. "Dangerous dreams," he said. "Careful. Sometimes, we wake up and discover the dream is in the same room as us." He didn't pull the ribbon. he didn't rip it off. Instead, he used his thumb to caress the vein where my blood pulsed frantically under the red fabric. It was a possessive touch. He was claiming the mark he had left, mocking the fact that I didn't know it was him. "The coffee's getting cold," he said abruptly, stepping away and breaking the spell. I stood there, leaning against the counter, legs shaking and breath short. He turned to the window, drinking his coffee, but I saw his reflection in the glass. He was watching me. And there was a hunger in that look that wasn't there yesterday. Yesterday, I was the annoying granddaughter. Today, I was the woman in the mask. The woman he had pinned against a wall. And he knew I had kept the ribbon. Loading the piano into the van was an exercise in silent torture. Julian had called 2 men from the village to help with the brute weight, but he coordinated everything. Watching him work was a distraction. He had taken off the knit sweater due to the effort, leaving only a tight white t-shirt. The muscles of his back and arms tensed as he lifted, pushed, and maneuvered the heavy instrument. He was brute force and elegance. When we finally secured the piano in the back of the Land Rover, he was sweating, hair stuck to his forehead, breathing heavy. He approached me, wiping his hands on a cloth. "It's safe. Like you." We got into the car for the return trip. The mood had shifted. The isolation of the cabin had broken down barriers, but the revelation of the ribbon had built a new tension, sharper and sexual. During the descent, Julian put a cassette in the old radio. Rachmaninoff. Concerto No. 2. Music of overwhelming passion. He drove with one hand, the other resting on the gear stick, dangerously close to my leg. "For days left until the gala," he said, breaking the silence. "When we arrive, we're taking this piano to your room." I looked at him, surprised. "To my room? I thought you were putting it in a rehearsal room." "It's not safe," he said, looking at me sideways. "After what happened with the bench. I don't want that piano out of your sight. You're going to sleep with it. Eat with it. Live with it until the 31st. And you? Me?" He smiled, that new, enigmatic smile. "My room is at the end of your hall, Clara. I'll be able to hear every note you play. And if you stop, I'll come over to find out why." I swallowed hard. "Is that a threat?" He stopped the car in front of the chateau gates. The sun shone on the Gothic towers, but the real danger was in here, sitting next to me. Julian turned off the engine and turned fully to me. His gaze dropped once more, briefly, to the sleeve of my coat where the ribbon was hidden. "No, little note," he said, voice low. "It's an incentive. Because now I know you have secrets. And I'm dying to discover them all." He got out of the car, leaving me there, heart beating to the furious rhythm of Rachmaninoff and the absolute certainty that the ribbon on my wrist was no longer my secret. It was his weapon. The scream got stuck in my throat, choked by panic. I woke with the gray morning light entering my bedroom windows. The first thing I saw was the silhouette of the piano at the foot of the bed, a comforting presence of wood and history. The second thing I saw was the top of the piano. It was empty. The black leather folder. The only copy of the last winter symphony. The incomplete pages I had been studying until my eyes burned the night before. They were gone. I jumped out of bed, ignoring the cold, and ran to the piano. I felt the wood, the bench, the floor. Nothing. I searched the nightstand drawers. Nothing. Someone had entered my room while I slept. Someone had been inches from me, in the dark, and had taken my grandfather's legacy. I threw on a robe in a hurry, not caring that I was barefoot or disheveled, and sprinted into the hallway. I found Julian at the top of the main staircase. He was talking to the head of security, a burly man with a grim face. Julian wore a dark suit, impeccable, the absolute contrast to my state of hysteria. "They stole it!" I screamed, voice echoing off the stone walls. Julian turned immediately. His professional calm fractured as soon as he saw my face. "Clara? What happened?" "The score. The symphony. It's gone." I reached him, grabbing the lapels of his jacket to steady myself because my legs threatened to give way. It was on top of the piano when I fell asleep. Someone entered my room, Julian. Julian's eyes darkened, turning into two pools of oil. He held my arms, steadying me. "Are you hurt? Did they do anything to you?" "No, I didn't wake up. They just took the music." "How convenient." The voice came from below. Clara was coming up the stairs, followed by the lawyer's wig. She wore a cream cashmere dress and displayed a smile of fake pity that made me want to scream. "The girl loses the only copy of Magnus' masterpiece 3 days before the gala?" Clara shook her head, stopping a step below us. I warned the board. "She is unstable. Too much pressure for a teacher of children." "I didn't lose it," I retorted, anger supplanting fear. "It was stolen. Or maybe you realized you can't play it and decided to lose the proof of your failure," Clara suggested, with sweet poison in her voice. "Hers weak, I suppose without the original score, the clause of the will cannot be fulfilled?" The lawyer cleared his throat, uncomfortable. "Technically, if the work does not exist, it cannot be played. The inheritance would remain in suspension, or pass to the administration." I felt the ground slipping away. This was it. Checkmate. "Shut up, Clara." Julian's voice was low, but it cut the air like a whip. He let go of me and took a step toward Clara, placing himself between her and me. His posture was menacing. "No one is invoking technical clauses while I am director." "You can't protect her from her incompetence, Julian," Clara said, losing her smile. "The music is gone. It's over." Julian reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and took out his phone. "The music is not gone." He tapped the screen and turned it to Clara and the lawyer. There it was. A high-resolution photograph of the first page of the symphony. I looked at him, shocked. "When?" "In the cabin," Julian said, without looking at me, keeping his eyes fixed on Clara like a predator staring down prey. "While you slept. I photographed every page. Front and back. Uploaded to the cloud and sent to my lawyer in Zurich." Clara paled. The triumph vanished from her face. That is a digital copy. Not the original." "It is the music," Julian growled. "And she will play it. Now, get out of my face before I forget I am a gentleman." Clara huffed, turned her back, and descended the stairs with hard steps, followed by the lawyer. As soon as they disappeared, Julian turned to me. The mask of control fell. He grabbed my hand and pulled me back toward the bedroom hallway. "Let's go to your room. Now." "Julian, you saved me," I whispered, trying to keep up with his long strides. "You photographed the music." "Of course I photographed it. I knew they wouldn't play fair. But that doesn't solve the main problem." He stopped in front of my bedroom door and pushed it open. "Someone entered here with a master key. Internal security is compromised." He entered my room as if he owned it. His eyes swept the space, the unmade bed, the empty piano, the closed windows. He walked to the stone fireplace. Was the fireplace lit last night? Yes. It was dying down when I fell asleep. Julian knelt in front of the cold grate. "Clara, Come see this. I approached. Amidst the gray ashes, there were black fragments of burnt paper. Thick, quality paper. My heart stopped. Did they burn the score? Here? While I slept? Julian reached out and picked up a piece of singed paper that hadn't been fully consumed. He blew off the ash. No, he murmured, frowning. Magnus' music paper was ruled. This has typed letters. He held the fragment up to the light. Only a few loose words could be read in German: toxicology and heart failure. And a date. The date was 2 days before my grandfather's death. Toxicology? I read, feeling a cold shiver. Julian, what is this? Julian crushed the paper in his hand, his expression darkening terribly. He stood up. This is not the symphony. This is a medical report. But grandfather died of a heart attack. That's what the lawyer said. Natural causes. Julian looked at me. The intensity in his eyes was frightening. Magnus was healthy as a bull. His heart would only stop if someone forced it to stop. Realization hit me like a punch to the stomach. Are you saying he was murdered? I'm saying someone entered your room not just to steal the music, but to destroy evidence Magnus must have hidden here. Maybe inside the piano. Maybe in a secret compartment only he knew about. He looked at the piano, then the door, and finally me. He approached, invading my personal space. The scent of sandalwood enveloped me, but this time there was no seduction, only danger. He raised his hand and touched my face, thumb grazing my cheek. They are desperate, Clara. Stealing the music was a distraction. The real goal was to burn this. And the original score? Probably with a Lara or an accomplice, to ensure you fail in case I didn't have the copy. He lowered his hand to my shoulder, squeezing it. Listen to me well. From this moment on, you do not sleep here alone. My eyes widened. What? My room is at the end of the hall. It has a lock I installed and only I have the key. You are sleeping there. Julian, that is inappropriate? He let out a dry, humorless laugh. We are far beyond appropriate, little note. We are dealing with homicide and sabotage. He brought his face close to mine, lips inches away. Besides, his voice dropped to that hoarse whisper that made my knees shake, you have my ribbon on your wrist. It was about time you slept in my bed. I blushed violently, but didn't retreat. Just to sleep, I said, trying to regain some dignity. Julian smiled, and the danger in his eyes mixed with that hunger I saw in the cabin. Let's pretend we believe that. Now, pack your bags. The game just changed. And I won't let you be the next thing burning in this fireplace. Julian's room was like the man himself, dark, austere, and dangerously seductive. There was none of the Gothic opulence of the rest of the chateau. The walls were lined with dark walnut paneling, the bed was vast with charcoal gray linen sheets, and an entire wall was glass, facing the abyss of the Alps. But what dominated the space wasn't the bed. It was the music. Scores stacked on tables, shelves overflowing with composer biographies and, in a corner, a professional electronic keyboard with headphones hanging off it. It was 2 a.m. The day had been a whirlwind of discreet staff interrogations and amateur forensic analysis of the burnt papers. Now, silence reigned. I was sitting at his desk, dressed in a white shirt of his that served as a dress, bare legs curled against my chest. Julian's tablet was in front of me, displaying the photographs of the stolen symphony. I looked at the notes, but I didn't see them. My mind was stuck in a loop between the burnt toxicology report and the man in the attached bathroom. The bathroom door opened. Steam rolled out in white clouds, bringing the scent of soap and clean skin. Julian came out. He had a towel wrapped around his waist and another drying his hair. His chest was bare, still damp from the shower, drops of water running down defined abdominal muscles and disappearing into the towel line. My breath hitched. I had seen handsome men. But Julian Vane was a living sculpture of raw masculinity. There were faint scars on his left shoulder and a small, almost invisible tattoo on his ribs, a musical staff with a single rest note. He stopped when he saw me looking. He didn't cover himself. He wasn't ashamed. On the contrary, his eyes darkened, accepting my gaze as tribute. "See something you like, Clara?" he asked, voice husky from the steam. I blushed and looked back at the tablet. "I'm trying to work." The transition to the final crescendo still doesn't make sense. Grandfather left a harmonic void here that I can't fill. Julian threw the hair towel onto a chair and walked to me. Magnus didn't write voids. He wrote questions. He stopped behind my chair. I felt the heat of his body on my back, the humidity of his skin radiating to me. He leaned over my shoulder to look at the screen, resting one hand on the desk and the other landed on the arm of the chair, cornering me. "Play for me," he whispered, face near my neck. "Not on the keyboard. Here." He took my right hand and placed it on the cold wood of the desk. "Strum the melody." I obeyed, my fingers moving silently over the varnished wood. Julian watched my hands. "You're hesitating at measure 12, he murmured. "Why?" "Because it's dissonant. It hurts to hear. Pain is the point, Clara." His free hand moved up my bare arm, leaving a trail of fire, until it reached my shoulder. He squeezed lightly. "You're trying to solve the music with logic. But this symphony isn't logic. It's a confession." He moved, standing beside me. Our faces were dangerously close. He smelled of rain and contained desire. "What kind of confession?" My voice was a threat. "That of a man who knows he is going to die," Julian said, gray eyes piercing mine. "And that of a man who knows his granddaughter is the only person capable of understanding him." He looked at my left hand, resting in my lap. His shirt sleeve was too long for me, covering my hands. With a slow, deliberate movement, Julian took my left wrist. He pulled the sleeve up. The crimson velvet ribbon was there. The contrast with his white shirt was violent. Julian ran his thumb over the knot. "You still have it," he said, not as a question, but as confirmation. "You knew," I whispered, heart beating against ribs like a caged bird. "In the cabin. You saw." "I knew the moment I touched you at the ball," he confessed, voice dropping an octave. "Your scent. The way your body fit mine. I could be blindfolded, Clara, and I would recognize your skin among 1,000. He pulled me from the chair. I stood up, trapped between the desk and his body. His towel was dangerously low. My bare legs brushed against his. "Why didn't you say anything?" I asked, trembling. "Because I wanted to see how far you would go," he said, taking a step forward, eliminating the space between us. "I wanted to see if the prim girl from London had the courage of the masked woman who almost brought me to my knees in a dark alcove." He released my wrist and his hands moved up to my face, holding me with a possessiveness that made me lose my mind. "And you do," he murmured against my lips. "You have more fire than I know how to handle. And that terrifies me." "The maestro is afraid?" I teased, using his words against him. Julian's eyes flamed. "I'm afraid of what I'll do if I don't touch you right now." He didn't wait for permission. He knew he already had it from the first moment our eyes met in the great hall. He lowered his mouth onto mine. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a collision. It was the hunger of days of antagonism, of sleepless nights, of shared music and imminent danger. Julian kissed me as if he wanted to devour the sound I made. His tongue invaded my mouth, demanding, hot, tasting of mind and man. I grabbed his bare shoulders, my nails digging into damp skin. He groaned against my mouth, a guttural sound that vibrated in my chest. His hands moved down my back, squeezing my waist, pulling me so hard against him I felt the hardness of his erection against my belly. He lifted me. With frightening ease, he sat me on the edge of the desk, pushing the tablet aside. My legs wrapped around his waist instinctively, his towel falling to the floor, forgotten. The skin-on-skin contact was electric. "Julian," I gasped, when he moved his kisses down to my neck, lightly biting the sensitive spot where my pulse beat. "Say my name again," he growled against my skin. "Say it, so I know you aren't thinking about the music." "I only think of you," I confessed, head falling back. "Since the moment you walked into that hall." He stopped. Lifted his head, eyes black with desire, breathing irregular. He held my face again, thumbs tracing my cheekbones. "You are my ruin, Clara Belmonte. I should protect you. I should focus on who killed your grandfather. But when you were wearing my shirt, in my room..." He kissed me again, deeper, more desperate. His hand slid inside the open shirt, touching my skin, claiming every inch. "The symphony can wait," he whispered. "Tonight, the only music I want to hear is you." And while the snow fell outside, muffling the world in its dangers, I let Julian Vane show me exactly how to play the forbidden chords my grandfather had never managed to write. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid to burn. Waking up in Julian's bed was like waking up in a dream I didn't want to leave. His side of the mattress was empty, but still warm. Morning light of December 31st entered through the panoramic windows, reflecting off the eternal snow of the Alps, but the room felt protected from the cold. My body ached in a delicious way, a physical reminder of every touch, every hoarse whisper, every promise made in the darkness. I reached out and found a note on his pillow, written in the angular, fast handwriting I already knew from the scores, "Gone to check perimeter security for the gala. Back in 20 minutes with breakfast. Don't leave. J." I smiled, pressing the paper to my chest. For the first time since arriving in Switzerland, I didn't feel like an intruder. I felt at home. I got up, putting his shirt back on, now rumpled and smelling of sex and sandalwood, and walked to the office attached to the bedroom. I needed to review the third movement transition one more time before the gala. My mind, now cleared of fear and full of new confidence, saw the music with clarity. But when I entered the office, I wasn't alone. Clara was there. She was standing by Julian's desk, leafing through a file of documents with a casualness that froze my blood. "Good morning, Sleeping Beauty," she said, without lifting her eyes from the paper. "I see the Maestra's shirt fits you better than dignity." I buttoned the shirt to my neck, feeling my face burn. "What are you doing here? This room is private. Julian has the key." Clara let out a crystalline, cruel laugh. She held up a set of silver keys. "Julian changed the locks yesterday, it's true. But he forgot I lived in the chateau for 10 years. I have copies of everything, dear. Including his secrets." She threw the file onto the desk. The sound was dry, definitive. "What is that?" I asked, taking a step forward despite instinct telling me to run. "The reason he took you to bed," Clara replied, eyes shining with malice. "Oh, don't give me that shocked face. He's a man, you're pretty, but Julian doesn't do anything without a purpose. He isn't impulsive. He is a strategist." She pointed to the file with a blood-red manicured nail. "Read it." If you have the courage. I hesitated. But doubt is a fast poison. I approached and looked at the open document. It was a draft will. Dated 6 months ago. The handwriting was unmistakable, Magnus Blackwood. I read the central paragraph and the world stopped. In the absence of capable or interested direct heirs, I designate Julian Vane as my sole universal beneficiary and absolute owner of the Chateau of Music and all my assets. The air left my lungs. Julian, he was the heir? He was the son Magnus never had, Clara hissed, approaching me like a snake. Magnus had been grooming him for years. Julian was going to get everything. The castle, the fortune, the legacy. It was the dream of his life. She paused dramatically, letting the information settle. And then, you appeared. The lost granddaughter. The midnight clause was a last-minute change. Magnus had a crisis of conscience on his deathbed and changed the will 2 weeks before dying. Clara leaned into my ear. Julian lost everything the moment you set foot in this castle, Clara. Do you really think he loves you? Or do you think he realized the only way to keep control of the conservatory was to control its owner? That's a lie, I whispered, but my voice failed. He protected me. He saved me in the cabin. He protected his investment. Clara laughed. If you die or fail, the conservatory goes to the board, which means me. He hates me. He'd 1,000 times prefer to seduce you and marry you to ensure he remains king of the castle than see me in charge. The sound of the bedroom door opening made us both jump. Clara? I brought coffee and... Julian entered the office. He was carrying a tray with breakfast and a rare, open smile on his face. The smile died instantly when he saw Clara. And then, when he saw the open file on the desk. The tray fell from his hands. The sound of porcelain shattering and coffee spreading across the Persian rug was deafening. Clara, get out, he said, voice so low and terrible it seemed to come from underground. I'm leaving, Clara said, adjusting her fur coat. She passed me and touched my shoulder. Good luck at the gala, dear. If you can play with a broken heart. When the door closed, the silence that remained was worse than shouting. Julian looked at me. He didn't try to deny it. Guilt was written in every line of his face. Clara, let me explain. Is it true? My voice shook. I pointed to the document. You were the heir before I arrived? Julian took a step forward, hands out as if to calm a wild animal. Yes. Magnus told me he would leave me everything. But he changed his mind at the end. He wanted to give you a chance. And you knew? I asked, feeling tears burning my eyes. From the moment you picked me up at the airport, you knew I was the only thing between you and the fortune? Yes, I knew. But that was before. Before what? I screamed, pain exploding in my chest. Before you realized it was easier to screw me than fight me? Julian recoiled as if I had hit him. No. Clara, what happened last night, what happened in the cabin, that had nothing to do with the will. I fell in love with you. How can I believe that? Tears were now flowing freely down my face. You hid this from me. You said you hated me because I had abandoned music, but the truth is you hated me because I stole your inheritance. At the beginning, yes, he admitted, desperate. I hated you before I met you. But then I saw you play. I saw your courage. The will stopped mattering. Stopped mattering? I laughed, a broken, hysterical sound. Or became Plan B. If you can't beat them, join them. Was that it, Julian? Was I just a shortcut to the podium? He tried to touch me. I recoiled violently, hitting my back against the bookshelf. "Don't touch me." Julian stopped. He looked shattered. The untouchable maestro, the man of ice, was melting in panic. "Clara, please. We have the gala in 12 hours. Don't do this. They want to separate us. Clara wants exactly this. Clara is a bitch, but she told me the truth. You didn't." I looked at him, seeing the man with whom I had shared my soul and body just hours ago. Now, he seemed a stranger. A brilliant actor. I brought my right hand to my left wrist. I grabbed the end of the crimson velvet ribbon. Julian's eyes fixed on the movement. He paled. "Clara, no." I pulled the knot. It was hard to untie, because he had tightened it hard, with his teeth, with promises. But it gave. The velvet slid off my skin, leaving behind a white mark where it had been tight for days. "You said this was my leash," I whispered, holding the red ribbon like a dead snake. "But I am not your pet, Julian. And I am not your ticket to the presidency." I let the ribbon fall to the floor, between us. It landed on the spilled coffee, absorbing the dark liquid like a bleeding wound. "You will have your gala," I said, voice cold and dead. "I will play the symphony. I will fulfill the clause. But when the clock strikes midnight and I inherit this place..." I looked him in the eye, gathering every ounce of dignity I had left. "You will pack your bags and get out of my house." I walked past him without looking back, leaving the room where I had been happier than ever, taking with me only his shirt on my body and a hole where my heart used to beat. The mirror in the dressing room returned the image of a woman I didn't know. Clara Belmonte, the piano teacher from Brixton counting coins for heat, had vanished. In her place was a stranger wrapped in liquid silver silk. The dress, a vintage piece that belonged to my grandmother, adhered to my body like a second skin, leaving my back bare and falling to the floor in a fluid train that resembled molten mercury. My makeup was flawless, hiding dark circles from an afternoon spent crying. Lips painted dark red, defiant. Hair pulled back revealed the neck where, hours before, Julian's mouth had left invisible marks. I looked at my left wrist. It was bare. Without the velvet ribbon, I felt exposed. But I also felt dangerous. Pain is a powerful fuel, and I was burning with the kind of hurt that burns down entire cities. 1 hour until midnight. Outside, snow fell softly, ignoring the human drama. Inside, the chateau vibrated. I could hear the buzz of the arriving European elite, clinking jewelry, forced laughter, the scent of expensive perfume seeping under the door. A dry knock on the door interrupted my silent morning. 5 minutes, Miss Belmonte. I took a deep breath. Enter. The door opened. But it wasn't an assistant who entered. It was him. Julian Vane was leaning against the doorframe. If I looked dangerous, he looked lethal. He wore a tailored black tuxedo, with an immaculate white shirt and an undone black tie he was just finishing tightening. He was shaven, hair combed back, but his eyes. His gray eyes were red, streaked with blood and exhaustion. He looked like a man who had stared into the abyss and the abyss had spat in his face. The air in the small room grew thin. His scent, that damn sandalwood, invaded my space, bringing memories I wanted to tear from my skin. "You shouldn't be here," I said, voice as cold as winter outside. "It's bad luck to see the bride before the wedding. Or in this case, to see the victim before the sacrifice." Julian entered the room, closing the door behind him. He didn't approach. He kept his distance, hands in his pockets, as if afraid to touch me and ruin everything again. "You look stunning, Clara." His voice was hoarse, broken. There was none of the usual arrogance. Only defeat. "Save the compliments for Clara," I replied, turning to the mirror to put on a diamond earring, just so I wouldn't have to look at him. I suppose she's in the front row, waiting to see me fail so you can console her and get the job. I saw his reflection in the mirror. He closed his eyes for a moment, an expression of physical pain crossing his face. I don't want the job, Clara. I had the lawyers tear up that draft will this afternoon. I renounced any claim on the chateau. My hands stopped. I turned slowly. What? If you play that symphony tonight and the inheritance is yours, it's yours. If you fail and it goes to the board, I resign. He opened his eyes and fixed mine with desperate intensity. Either way, after midnight, I'm leaving. You don't have to kick me out. I'll leave on my own. My heart skipped a beat. Was he giving everything up? His life's dream? Why would you do that? Because I prefer losing the conservatory to seeing you look at me with that hate, he said, taking a step forward, but stopping immediately. I made a mistake, Clara. I hid the truth. But I didn't lie about what I feel. He reached into his tuxedo pocket and took something out. He walked to me and placed the object on my vanity, next to my lipsticks. It was the crimson velvet ribbon. Still stained with coffee. Still shaped like the knot that had bound my wrist. This belongs to you, he whispered. Whether you wear it or not. Whether you forgive me or not. You are the music, Clara. I am just the man holding the baton. He didn't wait for an answer. He turned and walked to the door. The piano is on stage. Tuned. The digital score is on your tablet, on the stand. He paused with his hand on the doorknob, without looking back. Play with anger, Clara. Play with hate for me. But please, play. He left, leaving me alone with the echo of his words and the red ribbon looking at me like an open wound. 15 minutes later, I was backstage. The great hall was unrecognizable. Hundreds of gold chairs, shimmering chandeliers, television cameras ready to broadcast to the world. Clara was there, in the front row, dressed in gold, chatting with board members as if she already owned the place. The orchestra was already on stage, tuning. The cacophonous sound of instruments warming up was familiar and comforting. Julian stepped onto the podium. The audience applauded. He gave a dry, professional bow. He didn't smile. He raised the baton and silence fell. I was in the shadows of the side curtains, heart beating in my throat. This was it. Everything came down to this. A stage assistant, a young boy with a headset, approached me with a bottle of water. Miss Belmonte? To hydrate before entering. Thank you, I accepted the bottle, but didn't drink. My hands were trembling. I put the bottle on a side table and that's when I saw it. Under the bottle, there was a folded paper. It wasn't normal paper. It was a piece of burnt music staff paper at the edges. My blood ran cold. I opened the paper with trembling fingers. There were no musical notes. There was only a sentence, written with letters cut from newspapers, like a cheap ransom note, but the message was terrifying. Silence is golden. At midnight, when you play the last note, the stage will go dark forever. Boom. I looked at the stage. At the piano. At Julian, who was about to start the overture. Boom? A bomb? A short circuit? I looked at the audience. Clara smiled, fanning herself. The assistant had disappeared. Panic rose in my throat. If I went out there and played, I could die. If I didn't, I lost the inheritance and Clara won. Julian looked to the side of the stage. He couldn't see me in the shadows, but he knew I was there. He raised the baton, waiting for my entry. I squeezed the paper in my hand. They wanted fear. They wanted silence. I looked at my grandfather's wooden piano. That piano had survived wars, winters, and heartbreaks. I ripped the silk of my skirt to give my legs room. I took a deep breath. There was no time to warn Julian. There was no time to call security. The only way to stop the disaster was to control time. If the threat was for midnight, then I had to ensure the music ended before that. Or that the music was so loud no one heard the explosion. I straightened my back. I stepped into the light. The audience held its breath. Julian turned. When he saw me, something in his eyes changed. He saw the crumpled paper in my hand. He saw the terror in my posture. And then he saw the determination. I walked to the piano. I sat down. I placed the paper with the threat on top of the music stand, clearly visible to Julian. He leaned in slightly. Read the word boom. His eyes widened imperceptibly. He looked at his wristwatch. 23:45, we had 15 minutes. The piece lasted 20. Julian looked at me. Fear vanished from his face, replaced by a lethal concentration. He understood. He raised the baton. But instead of the original adagio tempo, he marked a furious beat. Allegro. He was going to race against the clock. Against death. I smiled, a cold, sharp smile. My fingers landed on the keys. The game had begun. The music didn't start, it exploded. Julian attacked the first measure with a violence that made the orchestra jump. The Winter's Lament, which was supposed to be a slow and melancholic introduction, transformed into a frenetic race. It was a suicidal allegro con brio. The musicians, elite professionals, panicked for a microsecond. I saw the first violinist's eyes widen. But Julian didn't give them time to doubt. With a cutting motion of his left hand, he pulled the sound from them, forcing them to follow him or be run over by the rhythm. I dove into the keys. My fingers flew. The Steinway, which before seemed an enemy, was now an extension of my body. The Pleyel had stayed in the room. Julian had insisted on the Steinway for the stage because he needed volume to drown out the fear. He was right. The sound was colossal. 23:48. I looked at Julian over the piano tail. He was transfigured. Sweat already shone on his forehead under the hot stage lights. He didn't look at the score, he looked at me. Gray eyes were locked on mine, transmitting urgent instructions no words could express. Faster. Don't stop. Trust me. The thread of boom hung over us like an invisible guillotine. Every note I played was a second stolen from death. We reached the middle section, the part where my grandfather had left the gaps. Where the score ended and improvisation began. Originally, I had planned a soft, respectful cadenza. But now? With a bomb, real or metaphorical, waiting at midnight? Anger took over me. Anger at Clara. Anger at my grandfather. Anger at Julian and his lie. And, above all, an overwhelming passion for this man who was willing to destroy his own career to keep me alive. I tore up the script. Instead of the soft melody, I attacked the bass with dissonant, heavy, dark chords. The orchestra faltered. They didn't have sheet music for this. Julian didn't blink. He caught my change of tone in the air, like someone catching a bullet with their teeth. He turned to the brass and ordered a crescendo that mimicked the thunder I was creating on the piano. We were composing in real time, bleeding on stage in front of millions of people. It was a furious conversation. "I hate you," said my keys. "I love you," replied his gestures. You betrayed me. I am saving you. 23:53. The audience was mesmerized. No one moved in the gold chairs. The tension on stage was palpable, static electricity making the hairs on necks stand up. They thought it was art. They didn't know it was terror. Clara, in the front row, had dropped her fan. Her expression of triumph had vanished, replaced by confusion. What we were playing wasn't the music of a dying old man. It was the music of two lovers fighting for life. Julian checked his watch discreetly. 2 minutes to midnight. We still hadn't reached the climax. He looked at me. His face was tense, jaw clenched. He made a subtle gesture with his head. Now. End this. I launched into the final sequence. It was a cascade of arpeggios requiring impossible technical dexterity. My forearms burned. Sweat ran down my back, sticking the silk dress to my skin. My heart beat in unison with the timpani. I accelerated. The orchestra followed me, in a sonic vertigo. The sound rose, filling every cubic inch of the hall, vibrating in the crystal chandeliers. Julian raised both arms, body stretched to the max, looking like an avenging angel about to cast a bolt. I raised my hands for the final chord. A triumphant, absolute C major that would resolve all the pain of the piece. Julian brought his arms down with a violent blow. I hit the keys. Bam! The sound of the final chord was so powerful it felt like a physical explosion. I cut the sound immediately, taking hands and feet off the pedals. Julian closed his hand in the air, silencing the orchestra in a snap of fingers. Silence. Absolute, terrifying silence that lasted an eternal second. I looked at the digital clock at the back of the room. 23 hours 58 minutes and 30 seconds. We had done it. The music had ended before midnight. My chest heaved violently. My hands shook in my lap. I looked at Julian. He was breathing hard, hair stuck to his face, tie undone. He didn't turn to the audience to accept applause. He kept looking at me. And then, the hall came down. The applause was a physical wave. People stood up in a single motion, shouting bravo. It wasn't just polite, it was hysterical. They had felt the adrenaline, the danger, the rawness of the performance. Julian ignored the audience. He broke every rule of etiquette. Descended from the podium and walked directly to the piano. He held out his hand. I accepted, because my legs wouldn't hold me alone. He pulled me to him. There, in the middle of the stage, in front of the cameras, in front of Clara, in front of the world. You are magnificent, he whispered in my ear, hoarse voice drowned out by the roar of the crowd. If we're going to explode, Clara, at least we gave them a hell of a show. Still a minute left, I gasped, looking at the clock. The note said midnight. Julian squeezed my hand tight, his fingers intertwining with mine. I know. He turned to the audience, dragging me with him for the bow. But as we bowed, his eyes weren't on the audience. They were sweeping the room, backstage, the lights above, looking for the threat. 23 hours 59 minutes and 45 seconds, the hall lights began to flicker. Someone screamed. The sound system emitted a sharp screech of feedback. Julian! I yelled. He didn't hesitate. Pulled me behind his body, protecting me with his back, turning to face center stage. The clock struck midnight. There was a dry crack coming from the lighting rig above us. And then, darkness fell. There was no fire. There was no bomb. Just a total and absolute blackout in the chateau of music. In the dark, I felt Julian's arms around me, strong and unshakable. Don't move, he ordered in my ear. The game isn't over yet. The darkness in the great hall wasn't empty. It was filled with muffled screams, the sound of chairs dragging, and the growing panic of 300 people plunged into sudden blackness. But center stage, I was safe. Julian kept me pinned against his chest, an iron arm around my waist, the other hand holding the nape of my neck, forcing my head against his shoulder. I could feel his heart beating, not racing with fear, but strong and steady, like a war metronome. "They cut the main line," he whispered, calm voice close to my ear, vibrating through my bones. "Amateurs. Julian, the bomb." I tried to pull away, the terror of the note boom still paralyzing me. "There is no bomb, Clara," he said. "There never was. It was just fear." The only thing they could do was cut the power to interrupt the broadcast. Before I could process the information, beams of white light tore through the darkness. Not electricity returning, but tactical flashlights. For spotlights converged not on the stage, but to the left side, by the backstage emergency exit. The light revealed two of Julian's security guards holding a man dressed as a sound technician, who was struggling to break free, holding industrial pliers. And, a few meters from him, frozen like a gold statue under the flashlight's merciless focus, Clara. Julian released me slowly but kept his hand in mine, intertwining our fingers. "Ladies and gentlemen," Julian's voice projected in the dark with the power of a tenor, without needing a microphone. The hall fell silent instantly. "We apologize for the technical interruption. It seems someone didn't want the world to hear the end of this symphony." Emergency generators kicked in with a low hum. Soft amber light bathed the hall, revealing the confused audience and the crime scene to the side. Julian walked to the edge of the stage, pulling me with him. He looked directly at Clara, who was trying to retreat into the shadows but was blocked by a guard. "The concert ended at 23:58, Julian announced, looking at his watch. The broadcast was concluded. The clause of the will was fulfilled in full. He turned to the board members, who were pale in the front row. "As for the attempted sabotage, I assume the Swiss police, arriving at the gates right now, will be very interested to know why Miss Vance was by the fuse box with the technician we just detained." Clara lost her composure. Her face twisted with hate. "You planned this," she shouted, shrill voice breaking the elegance of the moment. "You knew." "I checked the perimeter this morning, Clara," Julian replied, cold. "I knew you would try something. I just waited for you to do it so we could catch you red-handed." Security began taking the technician away and escorting a furious Clara out of the hall. The audience, realizing the danger had passed and they were watching a drama even better than opera, began to murmur excitedly. Julian turned to me. The outside world disappeared. Clara disappeared. The board disappeared. He looked exhausted, but his eyes shone with a light I had never seen. "It's over," he said, running a hand over my face, wiping a drop of sweat from my temple. "The conservatory is yours, Clara. No one can take this from you now." "You knew about the threat and didn't tell me," I accused, but the anger had no strength. It was diluted in relief and adrenaline. "I needed you to play with truth," he admitted. "Needed you to feel the urgency. Forgive me for scaring you, but I would never, never, let anything happen to you. I would be in front of the bullet, Clara. Always." He reached into his tuxedo pocket. "And now, there is one last thing." He pulled out the crimson velvet ribbon. My heart stopped. I thought he was going to give it back. Thought he was going to tie it on my wrist again, claiming me as his conquest. But he didn't. Julian extended his own left arm. Pulled up the pristine white shirt sleeve, exposing the strong wrist, marked by tendons and veins. He held the ribbon out to me. "Tie it," he asked, voice husky, in a pleading tone that disarmed me completely. Julian, what are you doing? For months, I wanted this conservatory. Wanted the power. Wanted the legacy. He took a step forward, closing the distance between us, ignoring the hundreds of people watching in absolute silence. And when I tied this ribbon on you at the ball, I thought I was binding you to me. Controlling you. He shook his head, a sad, passionate smile curving his lips. I was wrong. I don't want to be the owner of the castle, Clara. I want to be the man who watches you play. He pressed the ribbon into my palm. Tie it on me. Bind me to you. Because I'm not going anywhere without you. My place isn't on the podium, nor in the director's office. My place is wherever you are. My hands trembled as I held the soft velvet. You said you were leaving after midnight, I whispered, afraid to believe. Only if you send me away, he said. But I warn you. I am a difficult man to shoo away. I looked at him. At the man who had been my enemy, my mentor, my tormentor, and my savior. The man who had traded a lifetime's inheritance just to see me shine for 5 minutes. I wrapped the red ribbon around his wrist. Tightened the knot. Firm. Secure. Julian looked at his wrist, marked by blood red, and then at me. His expression was pure surrender. Yours, he whispered. My music, my life, my soul. All yours. At that moment, the main lights of the chateau came back with a crack, illuminating the hall in all its golden glory. But it wasn't the electric light that blinded us. Outside, through the gigantic windows facing the Alps, the sky exploded. Fireworks. Red, gold, silver. Cascades of light reflected on the snow, painting the world impossible colors. Midnight, Julian said, looking at the explosion of light outside. He turned back to me, grabbed me by the waist and lifted me off the floor, spinning me in the air while the audience exploded in applause and shouts of Happy New Year. When my feet touched the ground, he didn't let go. Happy New Year, little note, he murmured against my mouth. And then he kissed me. It wasn't a stage kiss. It wasn't a masked kiss. It was a kiss of possession, of love, of relief, and of promise. A kiss that tasted of victory and winter and sandalwood. I clung to him, fingers burying in his hair, body molding to his, feeling the velvet ribbon on his wrist pressing against my back. The symphony was over. The threat had passed. But as the fireworks illuminated our faces pressed together, I knew our music was just beginning. The silence of snow is different from the silence of fear. It is clean. Luminous. Absolute. The first morning of January was born with a sun so bright it transformed the Alps into an expanse of blinding diamonds. But inside the master bedroom of the chateau, the room that was now rightfully mine, but smelled entirely of him, I only had eyes for the man sleeping next to me. Julian lay on his stomach, the linen sheet fallen at his waist, exposing a long line of his back and relaxed shoulder muscles. His left arm was stretched over the pillow where my head had rested. And there, on his wrist, standing out against tan skin, was the crimson velvet ribbon. He hadn't taken it off. Not to sleep, nor during the long, exhausting night of celebration and police statements. He wore it like a wedding ring, a mark of ownership he displayed with arrogant pride. I ran a finger lightly down his back, tracing the line of his spine. He woke slowly, rolling over to face up. Gray eyes opened, still clouded with sleep, but focused immediately on me. A lazy, devastatingly sexy smile curved his lips. "Good morning, Madam Director," his voice was hoarse, grave, vibrating in his morning chest. "Good morning, Maestro," I replied, resting my chin on his chest. "Sleep well?" Like a man who no longer has to carry the world on his back. He stretched his arms and pulled me on top of him, wrapping me in a warm embrace. Clara is in custody in Zurich. The board called at 8 a.m. asking for clemency. And the chateau has never been safer. I kissed his neck, smelling his skin, warm and familiar. I have a meeting with lawyers at noon to sign official possession. Julian tensed for a second. His hands stopped in my hair. And then? Going back to London to pack? Selling this? I pulled back enough to look at him. Insecurity was still there, hidden deep in those storm eyes. London? I laughed softly. Julian, I said goodbye to that life the moment I stepped onto that stage last night. I traced the outline of his mouth with my thumb. I'm staying. But the chateau is too big for one person. And a conservatory needs a music director who knows how to yell at cellos when they drag. His eyes shone. Are you offering me a job, Clara? Me? The man who tried to steal your inheritance? I'm offering you a partnership, I corrected. Half the chateau. Half the decisions. And the entirety of my headaches. Julian grabbed my hand and kissed the palm, lingering there. Accepted. Under one condition. Which? He raised his left wrist, showing the red ribbon. That you never tell me to take this off. Because I like knowing who I belong to. My heart melted. Deal. Later, we went down to the great hall. It was empty. The gala chairs had been removed, cleaning crews had left everything immaculate. The space had resumed its silent grandeur. The black Steinway shone center stage, bathed in sunlight. But that wasn't where we went. In a corner, by the panoramic window, was the small playold piano we had brought from the cabin. Julian sat on the bench, the safe bench he had checked, and pulled me onto his lap. The last winter symphony is finished, he said, placing his hands on my waist. The world loved it. Critics are calling it the resurrection of the Blackwoods. It's a beautiful piece, I agreed, placing hands on keys. But it's sad. It's about the end. About death. Then what do you want to play? I looked at the snow outside. For the first time, it didn't look like a threat. It looked like a blank page. I want to play something new. Something without ghosts. I began to strum. Not Chopin. Not Magnus Blackwood. Simple, luminous chords. A C major unfolding into a soft, growing melody, full of promise and warmth. It was the music of the fireplace in the cabin, the kiss on the desk, the triumph on the dark stage. Julian watched my hands, fascinated. Then, without saying anything, he added his right hand to the high keys, improvising a harmony that intertwined perfectly with my melody. We didn't need to speak. The rhythm was ours. The breath was shared. The music filled the hall, rising to the chandeliers, expelling the last shadows of the past. It wasn't a winter symphony. It was the sound of the thaw. Julian rested his forehead against my temple as we played, the scent of sandalwood wrapping around me like a shield. What is it called? He whispered. I smiled, feeling the vibration of the piano in our glued bodies. It's called The Beginning. I stopped playing and turned to him. The man who had been my nightmare and was now my dream. Are we ready, Julian? For what? To write the rest. Julian smiled, that rare, genuine smile that lit up the gray of his eyes. He plucked the imaginary baton from the air and set it gently on the piano. Then, he kissed me. A slow, unhurried kiss, with all the time in the world ahead. Yes, little note. Our symphony starts now. END.